Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's Walk and Talk. And we've got some pretty wild news coming out over the last 24 hours. It's a beautiful sunny day today, but we're going to go for a walk through the forest. And let's start with the first article here actually. And that is the announcement from France that they are going to be sending troops to Ukraine. Yes, this is absolutely true. Macron is calling this the first wave of deployment of French troops, or boots on the ground as I refer to it. And a little bit worrying. I know many of you will disagree with me on this, and you probably support that, sending Western troops into Ukraine. Personally, I think it's going to cause more escalation. I think it's going to create an even more dangerous world than we're living in right now. And we really are living in a very, very dangerous world. And it does concern me to some extent. I feel as though I'm somewhat protected from a lot of it through the plans I've made, through living where I live quite rurally. But I am still concerned about a lot of the rhetoric. I'm concerned about Russia and what they're doing. I'm concerned about what's happening with Ukraine. I'm concerned about this new announcement to send the troops. In fact, let me just read out what the general has said here. Ukraine expressed approval for France's proactive role in sending troops to Ukraine, because this is a move expected to motivate other NATO allies to engage similarly. So this is what they're expecting. Macron is saying that they're just the first, and by them taking this action step, that it will encourage more Western or NATO allies to do the same. I'm not so convinced. Now, we talked about this before where Macron made that very bold statement, and he thought that other people were just going to agree, other nations would agree right away and say, yeah, we'll send ground troops. Yeah, great idea, Macron. Actually, he was completely on his own. It was just crickets. No other nation said they wanted to send ground troops into Ukraine. They're happy to send weapons, they're happy to send aid, humanitarian aid, etc., which I'm 100% behind sending humanitarian aid. Am I 100% behind sending these long-range missiles that are now being used to strike into Russia? No, not behind that at all. And I don't even think that's controversial to say. Sometimes people get upset with these sort of comments, but most nations are not behind that. There's only 2 or 3 that actually approve of striking using these long-range missiles. And the US has even said that they're not happy that their missiles are being used for this purpose either. Just while we're stood here, I want to show you this wheel behind me in the background. It's an old water wheel that I think must have been restored at some point, but it's gorgeous. This pool here, if you ever come to the island, is great for just taking a dip in there. It's freezing cold and lovely. And also Macron has just visited Scholz in Germany, because I guess he was expecting Scholz to do something similar, to say, oh, well done, Macron, for sending your ground troops in for training the Ukrainian forces on how to use a lot of these missile systems. So that's really what it is. He's calling this the first of many waves. So I guess we know what that means. I mean, we talked about that in a video where we talked about the phases. And one of the phases is the trainers on the ground. And there isn't really much after that in terms of ground troops. It would be some sort of deployment of, maybe it would be medical, or I mean, if you've already got the support in there, it may be medical units. But after that, it's pretty much some form of attack units. But I wanted to read out what Scholz actually said. He said that he was unconvinced by the proposal, stating it could risk all-out war. And not only that, Russia has announced that it's already killed a lot of French soldiers in the country. However, it's not quite accurate. I looked into the story more because people have been running with this, saying that Russia's killed all these French soldiers, hundreds of them, they say. It's not actually strictly true. They're basically mercenaries. If you look into it properly, these French soldiers are, many of them, former French military, but now they're mercenaries operating in the country. So that's actually who has been killed in the country. It's not French soldiers. Someone said to me, what's the difference between a soldier and a mercenary? Well, one is you're fighting for the government, the other is you're fighting for a paycheck. But even that's not accurate, because you get a paycheck from the government. So yeah, I guess one's more official than the other. Another article that just came out then is that French and German leaders say that Ukraine is allowed to strike inside Russia using the long-range weapons provided by NATO. And even the NATO General Jens Stoltenberg said to The Economist that alliance members should let Ukraine strike deep into Russia with Western weapons. So he hasn't said anything about troops, but he's talked about weapons. Putin has come back and said that if they do this, that it's going to create an all-out mass conflict and everything else. And he keeps talking about the nukes, you know, constantly talking about these nukes and tactical nukes. And now he's saying that the West is going to do a false flag and they're planning to drop a nuke and all this stuff. You know, there's so much rhetoric and talk going around now. It's become a war of words as well as a war of bullets. And I just find the whole thing so tragic. I really do. I just thought I'd make my point clear on all this. I think this whole war that's going on is an absolute tragedy for people on both sides, right? I don't sit on either side of the fence with all this, like many people say, I stand with this country, I stand with this country or whatever. I always stand with one group, and it's the civilians involved, it's the people. War isn't good for anyone except the people making the profit out of it. Even though I was a soldier and I did it for over a decade, I'm not pro-war in any way. When I would go off to war several times, I did it because I thought I was fighting for something, fighting for freedom and fighting for all the other stuff that they told me. I don't really believe that anymore. I think if you went back to, say, World War I or World War II, that certainly existed. People were fighting for their family back home. They were fighting for freedom and they were fighting for something. But you look at a lot of these conflicts that have been going on now, these are just bankers' war. I think someone actually, that was a quote, wasn't it? All wars are bankers' wars. And even World War I and II, if you actually read, I won't say the key word here, that fact that the key family that was funding both sides of the war. We know what's going on here. We're not stupid. We know that this is all about money and profit. And we've even had some more escalation this week. And this was from Estonia's Prime Minister. She said that the Russian Federation needs to be broken up. But that's not the most controversial thing she said. The most controversial thing, let me grab it from this transcript. She said that she's considering sending troops to Western Ukraine, aiming to relieve Ukrainian forces to fight on the front lines, though no immediate action has been made. So if Estonia then sends troops, you've got France sending troops, you've got some other countries saying they're going to be sending troops. This is escalation. This is not good. And now Putin's hit back at all of this, and what has he said? He said quite a strong statement, but remember, he makes strong statements like this all the time. He said, remember that, as a rule, they are states with a small territory but a dense population. Obviously, we can read between the lines here. He's talking about nukes. That's what he's talking about. Whether they are the most powerful ones that would be sent to a country, I think highly unlikely. I think what's more likely, if this continues, which I do think is going to continue with escalation and ground fighting, I think we're going to see something like tactical nukes being used. But that shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone, because I've been saying that for the last, well, since the whole thing kicked off, is what's most likely to occur here. And another thing I mentioned a while back was how throughout history we've often seen very powerful nations fall in wars or battles in particular, to smaller nations that had a lot of allies. And I actually think that's what's happening at the moment. I think that's what, even though Russia's not a small nation, I actually think that they are building this large alliance at the moment. And I've talked about this quite a lot. And we saw this as well in England. We saw this where kings, even the kings, were overthrown by lords who got together in secret meetings and decided they were going to overthrow the king. So this is not a new thing or a new tactic. It's been going on since the beginning of time. And that's why you don't want to underestimate small groups or small entities. So when I heard the news today that Russia has opened the dialogue with the Taliban in Afghanistan, it didn't come as any surprise to me at all. And they've delisted them as a terrorist organization. But I don't think it's just that. I think there's a lot more to it. This hasn't really gone into detail yet on the story. But just off the top of my head, what do I think this is about? I think it's to do with some sort of strategic partnership with Pakistan. Pakistan is an emerging economy. Yes, they're still developing, but they're going to be huge in the future. They also have a large military. Is it a powerful military and advanced? No, but they have a large military. But remember, you don't need to have a huge advanced military. All you need is a number of smaller militaries that can be well orchestrated. There are a lot of countries coming together. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing this shifting now. We're seeing these unwritten lines being drawn up, I guess we can say. But even with small entities like the Taliban, remember what happened when the extraction of troops happened, for the US troops. They left a lot of equipment, a huge amount of equipment. Do the Taliban know how to use this equipment? I would say no, but from what I heard, they were hiring and paying for consultants. So I guess what I'm saying here is things are getting a lot more complicated. We are seeing a lot more escalation, and I don't think any of this is going to end well. Another meeting that's just taken place is with Russia and Uzbekistan, in particular Putin and their prime minister, where they have forged new ties. They've strengthened the alliance. I think they're going to build them a nuclear power plant and all this sort of stuff. So we're definitely seeing these alliances strengthened at the moment. But another thing I wanted to mention in terms of all of this, especially around BRICS, the BRICS nations, they have just announced a new alliance with food, but in particular it's grain. Now you think of what's happened with grain around the world in the last 2 or 3 years. There have been some serious issues. And I remember, I don't know if this has changed now. If you're a UK farmer, please drop a comment below. But I remember about 6 weeks ago, I went to visit my friend on their farm. And what he actually said to me was, Neil, I'm surprised you haven't covered this in your video, but he said, there's nothing in the ground. There's no food in the ground. He hadn't planted. He said most of the people he knew hadn't planted. And he was saying the reason why is because it's been so wet. You know, the weather has been so bad that everyone's been waiting to plant. And he said that, you know, if you wait too long, you can't plant because you're not going to get a good harvest. There's obviously, you know, that Goldilocks zone for planting and sowing, reaping. So I don't know if that's changed now. Please drop a comment if that has actually changed. But that's worrying because that sort of backs up a lot of the data. Because remember, last year we lost a huge amount of crops around the world. And what have we seen? We've seen food price inflation as a result. Now, the other reason I find this so concerning, and I talked about the documentary I made it's in the Patreon if you haven't seen it. If you're a Patreon member, watch that documentary because it'll explain everything going on with global food. I think there's a global food crisis coming. I really do. And sometimes people say, well, oh, you said that a month ago, it hasn't happened. There's huge stores of food around the world. You don't get a food crisis in like a week, right? You know, there's different seasons of growing and there's different seasons around the world. But we are seeing some major issues with food. And on top of this, look at what all of these organizations are doing and the governments are doing. They're trying to destroy the farms. They're trying to get people off the farms. Compulsory purchase orders. They've got rewilding. They're taxing farmers so badly. Why do you think all of these farmers around the world in all these different countries are protesting? These are farmers. They've got better things to do with their life than to spray manure on government buildings and burn bales of hay and get arrested. Look, they don't want to be doing any of this stuff. They want to be at home farming. You think you think farmers like coming into the big cities? No, if they loved big cities, they wouldn't be on the farm. I also do not like big cities, so I can somewhat relate. In fact, let me just give you a list of a few of the things I wrote down then that happened in terms of all these adverse weather conditions then, especially in wheat growing areas. This was extreme dryness in Ukraine and Russia. We had cold spells in Russia, drought in Western Australia. We had the flooding in Pakistan and some of these other nations. Not saying they're big wheat growers, but this all adds up. We also had really wet conditions across Western Europe, and there's ongoing drought concerns in the US. And that's without even getting onto meat and beef prices that is coming for the US. I'll get into that in another video, but that is coming. I've been tracking this and that is coming. And I've even pulled up the data here. So I've got the data right here for crop yield globally this year. This is an official report. This is a research by the Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit. And this is for, I'll just talk about the UK specifically here. Arable farmers could face nearly £1 billion in lost revenue due to a wet winter, with a 19% reduction in revenue from key crops such as wheat, barley, oats and oilseed. Specific losses are projected at £751 million for wheat, £183 million for winter barley, and £173 million for oilseed rape. The ECIU analysis also has highlighted the severe impact on the UK's food security. And it's saying that the UK, I mean, this is also in my documentary, by the way, the UK is importing twice as much food as it exports. It is no longer self-sufficient. So if we have more of the issues that happened last year, this is going to be really, really bad. And I mean really bad for the UK. So I do see a food issue coming down the line. I think there's a lot of headwinds with all of this coming. I really do. Some real problems. I'm just going to walk down to the beach for a moment here then. All right, what better way to wrap up the video than down here at the beach? I just noticed there's some sea kale here actually. See this here? This is sea kale. You don't want to eat it at this point. Yeah, it's a little bit too hard now, but when it's fresh, that's lovely. Don't expect a video, by the way, next Thursday, a walk and talk, because for those of you that follow the motorbike races, you'll know the Isle of Man is renowned for this. And it's the TT races. This week was the practice week. Next week is the actual race. My house is on the race course. So I'm basically, my wife always says, we're prisoners in our own home from 10 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. 7 days a week. Well, it's not really 7 days a week. It's like 1 week. But yes, we can't leave for that time period. But we do get a beautiful view. It's an amazing view of the races. So we get to watch the races. So the island right now is chaos. This is the sort of 2 weeks of the year when you don't want to come as a tourist unless you want to watch the races and be part of the experience. It's an amazing experience actually, and I do love it for these 2 weeks, but it's not for everyone. So I won't be able to get out, I don't think, next week for a walk and talk. Still just working on the new course. It shouldn't be long now. That'll be released on a pre-release to the Patreon community very shortly. So with all that said, thank you so much for watching today and being a subscriber here. Thank you so much, really appreciate it. Take care, God bless, and I'll see you next time.